And welcome everyone to Job Search Strategies. This is the workshop Negotiating First Offers. I'm joined today by my colleague, Dr. Vanessa Doriot Anderson. Vanessa, would you like to say hi and introduce yourself?
Hi, yes. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Excellent, thank you. You can't tell, I'm wearing my A to I shirt though, everybody. Just wanna draw attention to that. So I'm Vanessa Doriot Anderson. I work with Joe at the graduate school on the professional development team, and I'm the senior director for professional development programming, and I direct the teaching and communication programs there too.
Perfect. All right, great. Thanks, Vanessa, for helping out. I really appreciate uh, you working with me on the workshop. So we'll go ahead and get started. And again, I apologize for the delay. Here's the link to the attendance sheet. I've also dropped it into the chat. And Morgan, if you could just be so kind as to refresh that so that everyone has it now. All right, so how to participate and engage. This workshop is going to have a lot of I'm guessing you're going to have a lot more questions. It's a little bit less interactive and more informational. It's a little bit hard to do this workshop where we look at documents and things because you sort of have to have offers and you need to be sort of negotiating things in those contexts. But feel free during the question and answer portion on either platform, if you post your questions in the chat, our team is going to put together a document that we read over those questions, and we'll try to get to everyone, all the questions as close as we can. So here's the agenda for today. We're going to talk about offers, then negotiating, and then we'll have a Q&A. And obviously, we have the sort of arrows going both ways because as you get the offer, the initial first offer, you negotiate, then you get sort of the counter offer. And so we're going to talk about sort of what to do, first steps, next steps, and talk through strategies for negotiating and why I sort of recommend the things that I recommend, and also what you can negotiate for. So overall, our goals are for you to understand the importance of negotiating, for you to feel confident in negotiating, and then our outcomes. Vanessa, you'll like this. I like to try to keep our workshops very Vanessa oriented here with outcomes. So be able to use principled negotiation. Maybe an outcome might be know what principled negotiation is versus some of the other ones. And know what to do when you get an offer and understand what you can negotiate for. So just a little bit of data to start with here. I wish I could cite this webinar. I cannot remember what webinar I was at, but I will tell you, I remember it was like a really great webinar. And I wrote it down in my Moleskine notebook, but the presenter said 56% of people accept the initial offer. So I did a little bit more research so that you could find some things. And so there's a study and 64% of people, and that's with 50,000 as the end value. This study looked at 64% of people on average accept first offers. And that's not really great. And if there's any large takeaway that I want you, that we'd like you to have from this workshop, it's that you should negotiate. Always negotiate, negotiate, negotiate. Don't over negotiate, but make sure that you negotiate. So a couple of things that I looked at when we look at this study is that 84% of Gen Z workers and 74% of millennial workers did not negotiate first salary offers. And overall, those 64% of folks do not. Again, what I want you to take away from this is that you should be negotiating your first offers. All right, so how do you sort of begin? Because in order to begin any negotiation, you have to kind of know objectively what's your market value, what are you worth? You all got into highly selective, very competitive graduate schools or your postdocs. And that means that they all believe in you, and your work and all of your skills that you're acquiring as a trainee in graduate school translates to value in industry. And so these are a couple resources that I wanted to point you to: salary.com, Glassdoor. I point folks to the Glassdoor in order to provide context for your value, with the caveat that these are self-reported. And so, take that with what you will. Also, PayScale offers a kind of evaluation report based on your education and experience. Indeed has a salary search tool that's really nice, and I'll make sure that you have the slides. They'll be posted on YouTube after we upload the video. Salary Expert. The thing that I like about Salary Expert is that it has a cost of living tool, which I think can be really helpful when you're trying to, you'll see later on, when you're trying to provide objective context for why you're asking and requesting the things that you're requesting. And then there's the Bureau of Labor and Statistics. And I remember, I remember when I was in high school, this Occupational Outlook Handbook. It was a really large publication that sat in our guidance counselor as we began to think about what we were going to do later in life and where we were going to go to school. This really large manual called the OOH, or the Occupational Outlook Handbook. And as I dug back through the resources here, it reminded me of that. But the Occupational Outlook Handbook can be very helpful in providing the kinds of objective context that I'm going to talk about a little bit later on to help you explain why it is that you're requesting what you're requesting. All right. So Vanessa, feel free to stop me here if you have anything that you want to add. But I want to start with when you get the offer. So usually offers are going to come over the phone and you're going to be super excited and you're going to jump up and down. And I want you to do all of that. I want you to jump up and down. I want you to be very excited. I want you, though, to also keep in mind that you want to thank them and you want to kindly ask for the details in writing. And you want to ask for the details in writing so that you can review that offer. And there's a couple of things that I'll point out. For instance, job search strategies. We've had some smaller startup companies that have come and spoken. Sometimes you're going to get offers that are complicated and they're going to have stock grants versus stock options. This happens a lot in startups, for instance. These are the instances where you're probably going to want a lawyer or a financial advisor to look over that offer with you. But as you sort of kindly, so you thank them, you kindly ask them for the details in writing, I want you to also make sure that you impress upon them that you're very excited, you're very happy, and you're eager to look over the offer. So you want to leave them with the sense that they can get you, right? You can work towards an agreement, but do not accept the initial offer over the phone. Don't get super excited and don't get pressured into being put in a situation where they say, can you accept this offer in the next 48 hours? Think about the context. Think about what that question is really doing. And the question is really trying to judge whether or not you're going to accept the offer and whether or not they can get you. And in that case, you still would want to say to them, thank you. I'll look over the offer in writing, but this is really exciting. And you'll follow up later. I also will say, I think it's important to ask that when you ask for the offer in writing, you also ask for a time frame of when you'd like when they would like to hear back from you. Anything, initial offers, Vanessa, that you would add?
Yeah, I would just add conveying enthusiasm. I just want to emphasize what you said about conveying your enthusiasm, but definitely don't make any promises on the phone, especially if it's your first offer. You just don't have the experience to be able to negotiate live over the phone.
Yeah.
So I'm just basically agreeing with you, but it's very tempting to just say yes because often this is something you've been waiting for a really long time.
Yeah.
But you're better served by taking some distance and looking at the written offer.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think what we're both saying here too is let them hear your enthusiasm. Don't think that that puts you in like a weak position, a weaker position for like negotiating. It doesn't. They want to hear that enthusiasm. So, but don't negotiate live over the phone. All right, so here's sort of like the way that I see the situation breaking down in terms of when you would need to negotiate. Uh, Usually, the two in the center are where we have to negotiate. If you have a great fit and it's a great offer, maybe you negotiate a little bit, but the negotiation process isn't as important. Great fit, bad offer, bad fit, great offer, and these may be like so the things that are in the middle, the things you're negotiating for are probably a little bit different. So a great fit, but a bad offer, you might be a little bit more firm on salary and trying to raise the salary. A bad fit, but a great offer, you might not be interested as much in terms of like the salary. Maybe that's what makes it a great offer. But the bad fit, maybe you want to talk a little bit or think about how that could how you could improve the fit with the company in your negotiation. And then the bad fit, bad offer. I'm going to advise you to walk away. I know that sounds crazy, but if it's a really bad fit when you show up at the interview or you go through the interview, it's a bad fit, and then they come back with a bad offer. I think that I know it's tough to hear it, but you're not, are you going to be happy if it's a bad fit and a bad offer and you just can't get the bad offer up past maybe like bad offer? You're not going to be happy in that situation. Vanessa, what do you think?
So I just want to agree that the sometimes the best offer you get is the one you don't take just because you choose not to take it.
Yeah.
And I've been in the position of taking offers that I shouldn't have taken in the past. And you can lose money doing that. You can lose time. Your career trajectory can be really impacted by that. So I don't think it's a negative outcome not to take an offer if it's not going to work for you.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And it's also, it can be like, negotiating and everything. It can be emotionally taxing as well. All right. So here are sort of the strategies that we often see. So the first two are sort of traditional strategies when it comes to negotiating. There's like hard negotiation style versus soft negotiating style. The hard sort of negotiating style understands the opposition as an adversary, and in this way, it means that you can only have like one side as being victorious. And then there's sort of like soft negotiating style where you see the opposite, not the opposition, but the person you're negotiating with as friends, and you work towards an agreement. And both of these have their like pros and cons, but they ultimately usually lead to positional bargaining, which is the second way that folks talk about negotiating. And positional bargaining, the reason that I don't get into that, I think it's not like it's ineffective, is that it's inefficient. And inefficient in the sense that you may or may not reach an agreement with it. So the idea behind principled negotiation, which comes from the text that you see on the slide, getting to yes, negotiating agreement without giving in, comes out of this Harvard negotiation project. And it's a great text. I recommend that you pick it up and you read it. It talks a lot, especially if you're going to go into industry. The principled negotiation works throughout or works on like multiple levels, not just salary negotiation. So the way that the authors talk about principled negotiation and the goals of it are that it produces a wise agreement if agreement is possible, and that it's efficient, and that it should improve and not damage relationships between parties. And I think that I really want to emphasize that last one. And here's just sort of defining the goal. And it's a quote from the text. A wise agreement can be defined as one that meets the legitimate interests of each side to the extent possible, resolve conflicting interests fairly. It's durable. And I might say it's not just that it's durable, but that it's sustainable and that it takes the community interests into account. I really think that it's this sustainability piece that's important when you talk about salary negotiations. And we'll talk a little bit more about this as we go through. So principled negotiation has four key components: people, interests, options, and criteria. So their advice, the author's advice for the people portion of this is to separate the people from the problem. For the interests, it's to focus on interests and not positions. That is, don't get focused on like sort of positional bargaining, or don't fall into that positional bargaining. Options, they recommend a sort of brainstorming or invent multiple options, looking for mutual gains before deciding like what to do. And then criteria, this one I think is super helpful when it comes to salary negotiations. Insist that the result be based on some objective standard. So how do you apply these to salary negotiations? So it's kind of hard to take the people out of the problem in salary negotiations because this very much, you're very much invested in this and you're in when you're negotiating your salary. What I will say though is that I want you to understand that this is the first, this taking the people out of the problem. One way of sort of thinking about that is that this negotiation's happening as a starting point for an ongoing relationship, and that you're negotiating with future colleagues. And this, I'm told, I've seen this piece of advice on several different webinars and seminars that I've gone to with negotiating, and they say don't ever underestimate likability, meaning like where we were talking in the beginning about being enthusiastic, about like showing your interest in the company, showing your interest in wanting to work with the team. It's easier to negotiate when folks are working with you to support you, right? You want the hiring manager to ultimately be supporting your, be supporting you in finding this agreeable offer. So interests. Remember, you share a common interest with the hiring manager, and that's that you want to get to an agreeable offer. You want to make sure that you help them understand why you're requesting what you are requesting, and that you use language like, in order for me to be successful, I need X, Y, or Z. And by this, I mean like for your like interest in like the interests here, you want to make sure that you provide this kind of like objective language that allows you to provide contexts for why it is that you're requesting what you're requesting. Vanessa, anything you want to add to these?
I wanted to ask, actually, no one
Yeah.
has asked this question, but I would have this question if I were listening to this, which is what is the difference between a position and an interest?
Yeah. So positions mean that you can't necessarily move away from a position. So you can get dug in from on positions, right? And this positional negotiating is kind of what you see. What you see, like in like a flea market negotiation sort of style, right? Not to reduce it to this, but oh, this plate's really nice. I'll take how's $40. and you get dug into like a position, like this is what I'm going to pay, where interests are more objective and more grounded in like a shared commonality that removes sort of the bargaining back and forth. Like I conceded this, so you need to like concede on that, if that makes sense.
Okay, thank you for explaining that.
So how do we apply this to salary negotiations? So with respect to options, know what you're willing to accept. I think, as the authors talk about options, I think it's important that you sort of understand what you're willing to accept and that you have a sense of that going into it. So know what you're willing to accept and what you find to be a good compromise. So for example, you ask for 10,000 in salary, they say we can do 5,000 in salary, and 5,000 in a signing bonus. And are you okay with this? Right. So think about what it is, think about what your primary order, your like primary concerns, and what you would like. Negotiate multiple issues simultaneously, meaning don't negotiate point for point. Negotiate the entire offer, and understand, and that goes along with like understanding the whole offer, and then also understand their constraints. And I know I know we're going to get a lot of questions about this, that are going to be like, how do you know if they're telling you the truth? And I think it's important that, you're not going to know whether they're telling you the truth. But I think that you should think about the hiring manager and the person that you're negotiating with and what their constraints are, and work from a position of, a bit of an optimistic position here, because they ultimately are going to want you to come there. They're going to want you to be successful. And it's not going to be great if you get there and they've built this relationship with you, through mistrust and not being transparent. Anything you would add, Vanessa?
I have another question.
Yeah.
So understand their constraints. So I'm guessing constraints might look different right now with COVID.
Yes.
How much should you assume about their constraints?
Yeah. That's a great question. I don't know. When you say assume, can you clarify a little bit? Like, um, do you mean like what they can and can't do? And now that like COVID, now that we have this
Yeah,
current situation?
I mean, and I'm working quite a bit on the academic side with those job offers. And one
Mhm.
question I hear a lot is, well, what if I negotiate and then they retract the offer? And
Mm,
there's certain, more uncertainty about job offers given, people have a lot of uncertainty about everything right now.
mhm.
So how comfortable should you feel negotiating within constraints that you might be assuming they have, or, how much to push, I guess is the question.
Yeah, I think it really depends. I think it really depends on that particular situation and what those individuals sort of, say to you. Um, Again, I think that really like when I think about constraints, I mean, if the hiring manager comes back and says, like, listen, I can do X, Y, or Z. If you need more, or if the head of your department, in terms the head of the department or the dean, comes back and says, like, I can do X, Y, or Z, but I can't do any more. And if you need more, I'm going to have to go to my boss. That's where I see like that. That's sort of like when I see constraints, right? Like that's when I think it's time to like not push, if you will. So, with respect to criteria, as the authors sort of talk about it, it's important to provide, as I said earlier, to provide objective context. And by that, I mean, make sure that you're explaining to the hiring manager, whoever you're negotiating with, make sure you're explaining to them why it is that you're asking for the things that you're asking. So if you have, if you can put things into like objective criteria, it's a little bit easier for them to understand, or it provides like some understanding and some context for them. So the cost of living is 10% more in the RTP area than in my current location. This is why I'm requesting X in salary. And this is where it goes back to really like making sure that you do your research and that you know your like market value. Vanessa, would you like to add anything here for the criteria?
Sometimes it's difficult to provide objective context. So I would think you'd go back to those links that you provided earlier.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, so in the chat, can everyone just list all the things that you think you can negotiate for? So just fire them off. Maybe read some of them.
Yeah, it looks like people have a lot of really good ideas. So, of course, salary, but then things like paid time off, maternity leave, work location, on-site remote, stock options, car insurance, potentially if it's a traveling job, scheduling flexibility, professional development opportunities, health insurance, equipment and book allowance, society memberships, childcare or pet care if you have to travel as part of your job, conferences.
These are all great.
Yeah, it's on the job training, relocation, signing bonus, promotion speed. A lot of really good ideas. Moving expenses. Yeah. I think that pretty much covers.
Yeah. So I've sort of put the list together, but part of what I just wanted to end with here is I just want to reinforce and emphasize that it's not just your salary, but that there are other things that you can be negotiating for and that you should be aware of as you negotiate those offers. Ooh. And lastly, make sure you negotiate. Well, thank you, everyone. So thank you for joining me for the Negotiating First Offers workshop of job search strategies. I really appreciate everyone tuning in, and thanks so much. I appreciate everyone not getting frustrated with the technology. And thank you. And thanks again, Vanessa. And we'll see you all this week. We have 3 job search strategies, so 2 more yet. Thanks.
Potato.